The steppe does not mark succession with ceremony. It accepts the change the way it accepts winter, through a slow alteration of light and movement. Grass bends under frost without breaking. Rivers narrow, then steady themselves. Wind crosses the plain with the same patience it has always shown, indifferent to names and titles, attentive only to continuity. Camps lie scattered across the land, their fires low, their smoke thin and pale against the early morning sky. After the great Khan's passing, the land holds its breath. Riders still move. Herds still shift. But something in the rhythm has loosened, as if the steppe itself is testing whether the patterns laid upon it can endure without the hand that shaped them. Silence stretches between camps, not empty but weighted. Ögedei moves among these spaces without display. He rides at an even pace, neither hurried nor hesitant. His posture is unremarkable. His clothing bears the marks of use rather than rank. Those who see him do not step aside in awe. They observe, measure, and continue their work. Authority has not yet settled into his presence. It circles him cautiously, like a horse not yet fully broken to the bridle. He is aware of this. The knowledge rests quietly within him. He does not reach for command. He listens to the sounds of the camps, the rhythm of labor, the distant calls of herders moving livestock before the cold deepens. Responsibility approaches him not as ambition, but as weight. In the days following the death, councils form without urgency. Elders gather. Messengers move slowly, repeating routes long established. The roads across the steppe remain open, their paths traced by memory rather than decree. Ögedei watches these movements carefully. The empire his father forged is not held together by force alone, but by habits repeated until they became expectation. Fire remains the center of each camp. Food is prepared. Disputes are settled with familiar gestures. Justice continues to operate, not from fear of punishment, but from the understanding that disorder carries its own cost. Ögedei recognizes this structure as something separate from himself. It existed before his elevation. It will persist only if he does not disturb it unnecessarily. At night, wind moves through the grass and around the tents, carrying with it the sounds of distant animals and the faint crackle of dying embers. Ögedei lies awake, not restless but attentive. The absence left by his father is not an opening to be filled quickly. It is a space that demands restraint. Responsibility presents itself in small matters first. A dispute over grazing boundaries, a delayed caravan, a message that arrives out of sequence. Ögedei responds cautiously, deferring when precedent is clear, intervening only when uncertainty threatens stability. Each decision is measured against the system rather than his own impulse. The steppe watches, not in judgment but in repetition. Seasons continue their slow turning. Snow comes lightly at first, then deeper. Camps adjust without instruction. Roads remain passable. The empire does not collapse in the absence of spectacle. It waits. Ögedei understands that succession is not declared in a single moment. It is accepted through consistency, through restraint, through the quiet alignment of one man's actions with structures larger than himself. The wind returns again at dawn, brushing frost from the grass. Fires are rekindled. Work resumes. The land does not ask who rules it. It asks only whether order will continue to move as steadily as it always has. Winter settles more firmly across the steppe. Snow gathers in shallow drifts along the paths between camps, pressed flat by repeated passage. Hooves leave dark impressions that harden overnight. Movement slows, but it does not stop. The land has taught its people how to persist without haste. Ögedei rides these paths daily, not to be seen but to observe. He watches how herds are shifted to sheltered ground, how fodder is counted and redistributed, how families adjust their routines without instruction. The empire, spread wide and uneven, continues to function through habits learned long before his name carried weight. Responsibility does not announce itself. It accumulates. A steward brings a concern about supply. A courier reports delay along a southern route. A local leader hesitates before resolving a dispute, waiting for guidance that does not arrive. Ögedei listens, weighs, and often chooses not to intervene. Silence becomes a form of decision. He remembers his father's way, not the victories but the patience. The willingness to allow systems to correct themselves before imposing will. Power, he learned, was most durable when it was least visible. That lesson now presses upon him, not as memory, but as necessity. Councils meet again as winter deepens. The elders speak cautiously, measuring words against consequence. Ögedei sits among them, neither elevated nor withdrawn. He observes how authority flows through custom, how legitimacy emerges from alignment rather than declaration. His presence alters the balance subtly, but he does not force it. Markets remain sparse but active. Trade goods move slowly, exchanged with care. No route dominates another. Redundancy preserves survival. Ögedei notes how this network, fragile in appearance, absorbs strain through distribution. It is a lesson he takes quietly. A minor conflict flares at the edge of the Confederation. Two groups claim the same winter pasture. Riders gather. Tension sharpens. Ögedei travels there without escort. He listens to the claims, studies the land, recalls precedent. The resolution is simple, almost unremarkable. Boundaries are adjusted temporarily. Compensation is agreed upon. No blood is shed. Order resumes. The decision leaves no trace of triumph. It leaves only continuity. Ögedei understands that restraint has preserved more than force would have gained. The system has been affirmed, not challenged. As weeks pass, fatigue settles into him. Not the exhaustion of battle, but the steady weight of attentiveness. Every choice carries consequence. Every hesitation must be justified. Leadership reveals itself not as command, but as endurance. Night after night, fires burn low. Wind circles the camps, lifting snow and letting it fall again. Ögedei watches the patterns repeat, unchanged by his presence, yet subtly reinforced by his restraint. Succession remains incomplete, but the empire holds. Not because it is ordered to do so, but because its structures have learned to persist. Ögedei begins to understand that his task is not to replace his father, but to allow what was built to continue breathing on its own. The steppe stretches under winter sky, silent and patient. In its quiet, authority takes shape not through assertion, but through the careful preservation of balance. Spring arrives without announcement. Snow withdraws into the ground, leaving the soil dark and soft beneath the returning light. Streams swell, then steady, carrying meltwater across familiar channels. The wind loses its edge and moves more freely, brushing the grass until green begins to reappear in scattered patches. Camps respond instinctively, shifting their positions by habit rather than command. The land resumes its slow expansion, offering space without promise. Nothing here signals a new ruler. Everything signals continuity. Ögedei rides with the season. His movement follows the thawing paths, tracing routes worn smooth by years of repetition. He notes where the ground holds water too long, where herds must detour, where camps pause before deciding to settle. These details accumulate in his mind without urgency. He does not issue orders. He allows patterns to reveal themselves. Authority, he senses, must grow from recognition, not interruption. Responsibility presses more clearly now. Spring demands decisions that winter delays. Grazing rights must be recalculated, labor redistributed, supplies assessed with the expectation of future scarcity. Ögedei listens as leaders bring concerns shaped by necessity rather than ambition. Each request carries the weight of survival. He answers sparingly, often by recalling precedent rather than asserting preference. His restraint becomes noticeable, though rarely named. The roads reopen fully. Caravans resume longer journeys, connecting distant regions through shared expectation. Ögedei observes the rhythm of these movements carefully. Markets form at predictable intervals, modest but reliable. Exchange is measured. Trust is extended cautiously. He understands that these routes bind the empire more securely than any display of force. Disruption here would ripple outward unseen but devastating. Justice emerges through repetition. Disputes arise over animals, tools, access to water. Ögedei watches how local leaders resolve them, stepping in only when custom falters. He reinforces decisions that align with established method. He corrects gently when impulse threatens balance. Punishment remains rare. Resolution remains the goal. Order is preserved through predictability. A threat surfaces quietly. A distant group tests boundaries, pressing into territory not theirs. Riders report the movement without alarm. Ögedei considers the response carefully. He measures the cost of force against the strength of precedent. He sends messengers first, bearing reminders rather than demands. The response is delayed, uncertain. Pressure builds without spectacle. Ögedei chooses restraint. He orders boundaries clarified, grazing reassigned temporarily, compensation offered. Patrols increase but remain visible, not aggressive. The message is clear without being declared. The incursion recedes gradually. No victory is claimed. Stability returns without celebration. The system absorbs the strain and resumes its rhythm. Spring advances. Grass thickens. Herds grow restless with abundance. Labor intensifies. Ögedei feels the growing burden of attention. Each day requires vigilance. Each choice must preserve cohesion across distances he cannot see at once. Fatigue accumulates quietly. Leadership reveals itself as persistence rather than command. At night he reflects on absence. His father's presence once filled these spaces decisively. Now silence occupies that place. Ögedei does not attempt to fill it. He allows the silence to remain. Within it, he senses the system learning to stand without reliance on a single figure. The thought brings both relief and unease. Councils gather more frequently. Elders speak with increasing confidence. Younger leaders test their judgment. Ögedei listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, it is to align, not dominate. Authority begins to attach itself to his consistency rather than his lineage. This shift is subtle, almost invisible, yet persistent. The steppe responds as it always has. Wind crosses the grass. Fires burn and fade. Paths deepen through use. The empire expands not through conquest, but through the quiet acceptance of its order. Ögedei recognizes this growth as fragile but real. It depends on restraint more than ambition. As spring nears its end, the land settles into equilibrium. Camps stabilize, roots hold, disputes diminish. Ögedei rides less urgently now, though his awareness remains sharp. He understands that leadership, once assumed, offers no release. It demands continuity above all else. The wind carries the scent of grass and earth across the plain. It does not distinguish between father and son, between ruler and rider. It moves over patterns laid by human hands and shaped by repetition. In its passage, Ögedei perceives a truth forming quietly. That power endures only when it submits itself to the rhythms it seeks to govern. Summer settles across the steppe with a steadier light. The grass stands tall and dense, moving in broad waves beneath the wind. Paths between camps harden under repeated passage, their edges worn smooth by hooves and wheels. Streams narrow again, their banks clearly defined by use. Smoke rises from fires at regular intervals, marking habitation without crowding. The land presents itself as a working surface, shaped by habit. Nothing here is ornamental. Everything exists to be used, preserved, and passed along. Ögedei moves through this landscape with growing familiarity. He notes how routes converge and separate without instruction. He watches traders arrive at known clearings and depart without delay. Goods are laid out, exchanged, weighed by hand and memory. No written mark defines value. Trust is reinforced by repetition. He understands that these exchanges hold the empire together more reliably than banners or oaths. Labor unfolds according to season. Herding dominates the daylight hours. Repairs occur in the evening. Tools are shared and returned without accounting. Children learn routes before they learn names. Ögedei observes these rhythms closely. They function without his command. His role becomes one of preservation rather than creation. Justice reveals itself in small adjustments. Disputes are resolved quickly, often before they reach formal attention. Compensation replaces punishment. Balance is restored through equivalence rather than force. Ögedei intervenes only when custom fractures. Even then, his actions are minimal. Authority remains quiet. Roads extend farther than before. New paths appear where traffic increases. Old ones fade where use declines. Ögedei sees in this a living map, one that responds to need rather than decree. He resists the urge to fix routes permanently. Flexibility ensures survival. Permanence invites strain. Markets grow more complex without growing larger. Specialized goods appear. Exchange becomes layered. Information travels alongside material. Ögedei listens carefully to what is said in passing. Delays signal tension. Abundance signals stability. He begins to read these signs as others read the weather. A shortage emerges in a southern grazing zone. Dry conditions reduce pasture. The response is procedural. Herds are redirected along alternate routes. Labor shifts temporarily. No single group bears the full burden. Ögedei observes without intervening. The system corrects itself. Threat does not arrive as invasion. It appears as imbalance. A powerful family accumulates more than its share. Others begin to adjust defensively. Ögedei recognizes the danger early. He does not confront openly. He redistributes responsibility through assignment. Influence disperses. Tension eases. Rules solidify through use. Precedent gains weight. What worked before is repeated. What failed is quietly abandoned. Ögedei encourages this through example. He references prior decisions rather than issuing new ones. Memory becomes governance. As summer deepens, fatigue settles into his body. Long rides take longer to recover from. Attention must be renewed daily. Leadership offers no pause. Yet the burden is shared now. Systems carry what once required presence. At dusk, he watches the roads fill briefly, then empty. Fires glow, then dim. Markets dissolve into camps. The day's activity leaves no monument. Only continuity remains. Ögedei understands that this is strength. The wind passes again across the grass. It flattens nothing permanently. It leaves no mark. The empire moves the same way. It advances through repeated, careful use. It survives by refusing spectacle. Autumn approaches quietly. The land prepares without announcement. Structures hold because they have been allowed to form naturally. Ögedei senses his place within this order. He is not above it, he is bound to it. The steppe offers no approval, it only responds. Systems endure because they align with its rhythms. Power remains legitimate only when it listens. Continuity belongs to what adapts. Late summer brings tension without noise. The grass remains thick, but its color dulls slightly as if holding back. Wind moves unevenly now, shifting direction within a single day. Animals grow restless. The land offers enough but not excess. It is a season that tests attention. Reports arrive gradually, not of armies but of pressure. A western boundary tightens as neighboring groups move closer than before. Their herds linger. Their scouts appear more frequently along shared routes. Nothing is declared. Nothing is denied. The steppe registers the change through repetition. Ögedei listens to these reports without urgency. He studies the pattern rather than the incidents. Each movement is small. Together, they form a question. He understands that disorder rarely announces itself openly. It advances by testing tolerance. He rides toward the boundary, not at speed, not with force. His presence is quiet. He observes how camps near the edge adjust their routines. Fires are kept lower. Watches lengthen. Trade pauses briefly, then resumes. Fear does not dominate, but caution spreads. The neighboring group sends envoys. Their arrival is formal but restrained. They speak of need, of drought further west, of temporary use. Ögedei listens. He weighs their words against the land itself. The grass here still holds. The streams still run. Temporary has a way of extending itself. He chooses a measured response. Grazing access is granted under clear limits. Routes are defined. Duration is specified. Responsibility for damage is assigned in advance. Nothing is left ambiguous. The decision offers relief without surrender. Some among his own resist. They expect a firmer stance. Ögedei hears their concern. He does not dismiss it. He reminds them of precedent, of earlier seasons when restraint preserved more than force ever did. The system must be trusted to reveal intent over time. Patrols increase, but they remain distant. Visibility replaces aggression. The message is carried by presence, not threat. The boundary holds. The neighboring herds move cautiously, aware they are observed. Weeks pass. No escalation comes. The shared use remains within limits. Compensation is paid where required. Trust grows slowly, not as confidence but as predictability. The system absorbs the strain without rupture. Ögedei feels the cost internally. Vigilance drains more than action. Each day requires judgment renewed. Each night offers little rest. Leadership reveals its quiet burden here, in sustained attention rather than decisive gesture. As summer edges toward autumn, the pressure recedes. The neighboring group withdraws gradually as their own lands recover. No announcement marks their departure. The boundary returns to its earlier rhythm. The land responds first. Grass recovers where it was thinned. Paths soften, then harden again. Camps resume ordinary routines. The tension fades without leaving a scar. Ögedei reflects on the outcome without satisfaction. No victory was achieved, no dominance displayed, yet stability remains. The system held because it was allowed to function as designed. The wind crosses the boundary freely, indifferent to lines drawn by men. It carries with it a simple lesson, repeated without words. That order survives not by resisting every pressure, but by shaping pressure into manageable form. Autumn advances with measured certainty. The grass thins and stiffens, losing its softness but not its resilience. Wind returns to a steadier course, longer in breath, cooler in touch. Camps begin their slow migration toward winter ground, following paths worn not by decree, but by memory. The land tightens its rhythm, narrowing choices, clarifying priorities. Ögedei moves among the shifting camps with deliberate patience. He watches how decisions are made without his presence. Leaders adjust grazing schedules. Labor is reassigned. Supplies are counted and stored. Each action follows precedent. He recognizes the system asserting itself, not in defiance of him, but independent of him. Pressure returns in a different form. A region to the east reports repeated thefts of livestock. No large force is involved, only small, persistent losses. Disorder here is subtle, corrosive. It threatens trust more than safety. Ögedei understands the danger immediately. Unaddressed, such erosion spreads quietly. He travels to the affected area and listens. Accounts vary. Suspicion moves faster than certainty. Accusations circulate without proof. Ögedei resists the impulse to punish quickly. He knows that haste here would fracture cohesion. He orders observation instead. Patterns must be revealed before judgment. Weeks pass. Patrols track movement. Losses continue, but their timing aligns. Responsibility narrows. When the perpetrators are identified, they are not outsiders but members within the system. This recognition weighs heavily. The threat is internal. Force would be easy. Repair will be harder. Ögedei chooses restraint again. The guilty are confronted publicly but without spectacle. Restitution is demanded. Future access to shared resources is restricted. No blood is shed. No exile declared. The response emphasizes repair over removal. The system asserts its capacity to correct itself. Some view the decision as weakness, others as wisdom. Ögedei accepts both judgments without reaction. He understands that authority must sometimes endure misunderstanding to preserve order. Justice, when consistent, gains strength over time. Winter approaches steadily. The camps settle into tighter formations. Fires burn longer. Stories shorten. Attention turns inward. Ögedei feels the weight of accumulated decisions. Fatigue settles deeper now, not in muscle but in spirit. Leadership offers no season of rest, yet the empire holds. Routes remain open. Trade slows but does not cease. Justice continues through habit. Expansion pauses naturally, not by command but by necessity. Stability becomes the measure of success. Ögedei observes younger leaders taking initiative. They reference prior decisions accurately. They apply method without seeking approval. This quiet transfer of responsibility reassures him more than any oath. Continuity is becoming collective. At night, wind presses against the tents, steady and persistent. It carries the same sound it carried in his father's time and long before. Ögedei listens, aware of his place within something larger than ambition or fear. Snow begins to fall lightly, then more fully. Tracks vanish overnight. The land resets its surface but not its structure. Beneath the white, paths remain. Systems endure unseen. As winter closes in, Ögedei understands that succession is no longer a question. It has occurred through repetition, restraint, and the quiet endurance of order. Power has passed not through declaration, but through alignment with the rhythms that outlast any single life. Winter holds firmly now. Snow lies deep enough to soften sound, to slow movement, to narrow attention to what is essential. Camps are closer together, their boundaries clearly understood. Fires burn longer into the night. The steppe has reduced choice, and in doing so, it reveals structure. Ögedei recognizes this season as the proper moment for method. Disorder has been contained, not eliminated. Trust has been tested, not broken. What remains is to ensure that future strain will be met without reliance on his presence. He turns his attention to form rather than response. Rules are not announced, they are repeated. Decisions made in recent months are recalled, not as his decisions, but as outcomes that prove durable. Elders and younger leaders are encouraged to cite them when disputes arise. Precedent becomes a shared tool, not a private authority. Responsibilities are reassigned carefully. No single leader holds control over grazing, justice, or supply alone. Each function is distributed across overlapping roles. Absence in one place no longer produces paralysis. The system begins to resist failure by design. Ögedei observes the change quietly. Where once questions came directly to him, they now pause at intermediate levels. Issues are resolved before reaching the center. When they do reach him, they arrive clarified, narrowed, already shaped by process. Authority has become layered. Justice follows the same pattern. Restitution is standardized. Limits are clearly understood. Punishment remains rare, but consequence is no longer negotiable. Consistency replaces severity. Fear gives way to expectation. Order settles deeper. Trade routes are adjusted for winter conditions. Alternate paths are confirmed. Storage responsibilities are formalized through repetition. No written record is needed. Memory reinforced through use proves sufficient. The network tightens without constricting. Ögedei feels a subtle release. Not relief, but redistribution. The weight he carried alone now rests across many shoulders. His role shifts again, from arbiter to guardian of balance. Intervention becomes increasingly unnecessary. There is resistance at the margins. A few leaders test the limits of shared authority. They push gently, then more directly. The response is immediate but procedural. Access is reduced. Influence wanes. The system corrects without drama. As winter deepens, stability becomes visible in small things. Camps remain orderly under strain. Supplies last as expected. Disputes decrease in frequency and intensity. Expansion is no longer a question. Survival is assured. Ögedei senses the empire changing texture. It is less responsive to impulse, more responsive to method. Less dependent on presence, more dependent on continuity. This transformation is quiet, almost invisible but irreversible. At dusk, wind moves across the frozen plain, lifting snow briefly before setting it down again. Nothing is altered permanently. Yet everything has shifted. Structure, once shaped by a single will, now persists through shared restraint. Spring returns slowly, working its way beneath the frozen surface before showing itself in color. The ground softens in places, then firms again. Streams widen and contract, testing their banks. Wind carries moisture now, not cold, and the camps respond with measured movement. Nothing surges forward. Everything advances by habit. The empire expands during this season, but without declaration. New groups arrive along familiar routes, drawn by predictability rather than promise. They observe before they approach. They note how disputes are resolved, how grazing is assigned, how trade is conducted without coercion. Stability becomes its own invitation. Ögedei does not receive them formally. He allows intermediaries to manage the process. Entry is gradual. Obligations are made clear through practice, not speech. Those who adapt remain. Those who resist drift away. Expansion proceeds without force, filtered by the system itself. Roads lengthen almost imperceptibly. A path used twice becomes a route. A route used often becomes expected. No marker announces the change. Memory does the work. The empire grows not by claiming land, but by absorbing movement into order. Markets reflect this growth subtly. New goods appear alongside old ones. Exchange becomes more layered, more precise. Trust extends cautiously, tested over time. Ögedei reads these shifts as signs of health. Growth that strains nothing is growth that lasts. Justice adapts without revision. Precedent stretches to accommodate difference. Custom proves flexible enough to hold newcomers without losing coherence. Ögedei intervenes rarely now. The system recognizes imbalance and corrects it through repetition. Leadership within the expanding structure becomes more dispersed. Local figures assume responsibility with confidence shaped by example. They do not innovate. They apply. This conservatism preserves coherence across distance. Expansion remains stable because it remains familiar. Ögedei feels the paradox of success. As the empire grows, his presence becomes less necessary. His influence persists, but indirectly, carried through method and expectation. Authority diffuses without weakening. The cost of this growth is subtle. Attention must remain wide. Fatigue deepens. The burden is not crisis but constancy. Each day resembles the last, demanding equal care. Leadership becomes endurance without drama. By late spring, the pattern is clear. Expansion has occurred, yet nothing appears altered at the surface. Camps function as before. Routes hum quietly. Justice holds. The empire is larger, but it moves the same. Ögedei rides at the margins more often now, not to direct but to witness. What he sees confirms his understanding. Stability has carried growth without spectacle. Restraint has allowed extension without fracture. Wind crosses the grass again, bending it evenly across distances newly connected. The movement does not announce expansion. It only reveals that order, when patiently maintained, has a way of spreading without force. Summer returns with its familiar weight. Heat settles into the land, slowing movement and narrowing attention. The grass grows coarse. Water becomes precious again. Camps space themselves carefully, avoiding strain. The steppe repeats its demands without variation, indifferent to how wide the empire has grown. Ögedei feels the season more sharply now. Long rides tax his body. Recovery takes longer. Pain lingers where it once passed quickly. Leadership no longer draws strength from momentum. It requires endurance sustained against time. Loss accumulates quietly. Trusted elders die without ceremony. Experienced riders grow slower, then remain behind. Absence becomes more noticeable than presence. Ögedei marks these changes without outward response. Grief, like authority, is carried inward. Decisions continue, but their weight has shifted. Each choice now carries memory alongside consequence. He recalls earlier seasons, earlier judgments, earlier companions. The system still functions, but it bears the imprint of those no longer there. Continuity reveals its cost. Responsibility no longer excites vigilance. It demands discipline. Ögedei must resist fatigue more than impulse. Errors now come from inattention rather than ambition. He compensates by relying increasingly on established method. The system supports him as much as he supports it. At councils, he speaks less. Others speak with confidence shaped by years of repetition. Their judgments align with precedent. Correction is rarely needed. Authority has become collective without becoming diffuse. This reassures him, even as it diminishes his necessity. Expansion slows naturally, not from weakness but from sufficiency. The empire reaches a point where preservation outweighs extension. Ögedei accepts this without regret. Growth has served its purpose. Stability must now be guarded. Nights grow longer. Sleep comes unevenly. He wakes before dawn, listening to wind move through the grass, through the tents, through the same spaces it has always crossed. The sound carries memory rather than comfort. He reflects on his father not as conqueror, but as builder of method. What was once driven by will has become sustained by habit. Ögedei recognizes his own role within that arc. He has not transformed the empire. He has allowed it to endure. The burden of leadership settles into a quieter form. It is no longer the strain of decision, but the acceptance of limits. Time cannot be commanded. Strength cannot be preserved indefinitely. Continuity must be entrusted. As summer wanes, the land prepares again for change. Grass pales, wind cools. Camps adjust without instruction. Ögedei watches these preparations with a steady gaze, aware that the system no longer depends on his vigilance alone. The steppe remains vast and unchanged in its demands. It has taken much and offered little beyond survival. Yet within its rhythm, order persists. Leadership leaves its mark not through triumph, but through the patience to carry weight until it can be set down. Autumn arrives without signal. The heat withdraws unevenly, leaving cool mornings and steady wind. Grass thins across the plain, revealing soil marked by countless crossings. The land narrows again, not in space but in possibility. Movement becomes measured. Choice returns to necessity. Ögedei adjusts with the season. He rides less, listens more. Decisions reach him already shaped, already tested by method. What once required his judgment now arrives with consensus. Authority has shifted from direction to confirmation. The empire continues its routines. Messengers travel familiar roads. Markets open and close by habit. Justice follows precedent rather than presence. Labor aligns itself with need. The system breathes steadily, no longer quickened by expansion or strained by disorder. He senses the change in how others regard him. Respect remains, but urgency has faded. They no longer wait for his motion to act. Responsibility circulates through established hands. Leadership has become a shared condition. Succession is not announced. It is prepared. Younger figures assume greater burden without declaration. Tasks once reserved for him pass quietly to others. Oversight replaces command. Memory replaces instruction. Ögedei does not resist this narrowing. He recognizes it as fulfillment rather than loss. Power once exercised has completed its work by making itself unnecessary. What endures now is structure. Winter approaches again. Camps contract. Supplies are counted. Routes shorten. The empire responds as it has learned to do, without confusion. Preparation proceeds without reliance on his presence. He reflects not on victories, but on continuity. The weight he carried has been distributed. The methods he guarded now guard the whole. This was the task he inherited and the task he completes. The wind crosses the steppe unchanged. It passes through camps and empty ground alike. It remembers nothing of names or reigns. It carries only movement. As the first frost settles into the grass, Ögedei remains within the order he sustained, no longer at its center. The empire continues, not because of command, but because restraint was repeated long enough to become habit. The land closes itself again for winter. Silence spreads. Fire burns low. And within that quiet, the work of generations holds, proving that endurance belongs not to those who rule longest, but to what is built carefully enough to continue when they grow still. Winter deepens, pale and steady. Snow covers the plains unevenly, drifting into hollows and along ridges. Rivers slow beneath ice, their channels narrowed but unbroken. The wind sharpens, carrying cold but no sound beyond itself. The empire, spread across steppe and forest, responds to these rhythms without need for instruction. Ögedei rides slowly along familiar paths, observing rather than directing. Camps are aligned, trade flows steady, disputes are resolved through practice rather than appeal. The systems he has reinforced move on their own. His presence is quiet, almost incidental, yet each step he takes confirms that structure persists. Younger leaders tend the network of obligation and exchange. Decisions arise from precedent, not from individual command. Memory and habit enforce order. Responsibilities circulate naturally. Authority has dispersed. He watches the confederation function without interference, noting how restraint has become self-sustaining. Loss is felt as absence rather than grief. Elders pass quietly. Some companions falter in winter's cold, others persist. The confederation absorbs each absence without collapse. Life continues in repetition, not in spectacle. Leadership's burden has shifted from action to observation. The empire expands subtly, not through conquest but by alignment. New groups attach themselves cautiously, following existing practices before settlement. Integration is conditional, slow, deliberate. Continuity precedes enthusiasm. Expansion is measured, never urgent. Systems grow outward not by force but by example. Trade routes, once precarious, now hum with steady passage. Caravans move along marked paths. Goods circulate with predictable rhythm. Dependence is tempered by redundancy. Information flows along reliable channels. Markets function on memory of scarcity and surplus alike. Authority lies in structure, not presence. Disputes arise less often. When they do, they are contained quickly, resolved through method. Elders consult records, precedents, and practice. Punishment is rare. Correction is procedural. Justice, once reactive, is now anticipatory. The confederation enforces itself through habit and expectation rather than fear. Ögedei feels the cost of leadership in his own body. Long rides tire him faster. Sleep is shallower. Desire narrows under obligation. Fatigue weighs heavier, yet the system absorbs his absence. Independence now rests in structures he cultivated, not in his motion. Spring approaches gradually. Snow retreats, streams open, grass grows with cautious promise. Movement resumes carefully, measured against winter's lesson. Responsibility continues to transfer without ceremony. Tasks reach those who already perform them. Authority circulates naturally through repetition. He rides along the peripheries, observing younger figures who enforce practice. They adjust labor, grazing, trade, and justice with a rhythm he once maintained. His role is now custodial, confirming that what is built through patience endures beyond a single hand. The steppe, vast and indifferent, absorbs all traces of empire. Paths remain, fires burn and fade, smoke rises in sequence. Movement continues across land once claimed by necessity, now stabilized by habit. What persists is not memory of a ruler, but of method repeated enough to become enduring. And as the wind sweeps across open plains, the quiet lesson of Ögedei's reign is clear. That authority, once exercised with restraint and reinforced through practice, can outlast presence desire. And ambition, leaving only the disciplined rhythm of systems that hold long after the hand that shaped them grows still.